Hi, I'm Gina-R-Farrar, reinvention coach, creator and host of Feminine Roadmap podcast, and leader of this amazing global community of women. If you are approaching midlife or are already in the thick of it, welcome home. Please grab a cup of something wonderful and join me for some real talk, practical strategies, and a big dose of sisterhood. I am so glad you're here. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're here to join us. Today, my guest is going to be sharing how she has lived an incredibly traumatic life, but she uses her story as a vehicle to talk about recovering from trauma, resilience, and living a beautiful life. My guest is dr-lise-deguire. She's a clinical psychologist, a burn survivor, and the author of her memoir, Flashback Girl, Lessons on Resilience from a Burn Survivor. Dr. Lise, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you.
My pleasure. Now, we were chatting a little bit before I hit record, and I would love to have you give us a background on how you came to where you are with this mission and this message, with your life experience leading up to this memoir. Just give us a little bit of something to anchor in who you are and why this message is so important to you.
Okay, well, I'll give you the short version, and then you tell me how you want me to fill it in. I was burned in a very devastating fire when I was 4 years old, and I was burned on 2/3 of my body, third-degree burns, which leaves permanent scarring. And I lived a childhood and adolescence in recovery from all that. And I went through quite a few other devastating things as well. But I kept myself going. I pulled myself together as best I could, became a psychologist, and I've been a healer since then. And 50 years have gone by since that fire, actually a few more than 50. And I decided it was time to tell my story because it is a pretty extraordinary story, and to use it as a way to reach other people who I know are also having very difficult times, as a way to say, look, keep going. Life is hard, but if I made it through what I made it through, you can make it through what you need to make it through. And that's why I wrote it.
In writing your story, Lise, did you find another level of healing and clarity on your message?
I don't know that I found another level of healing. And by saying that, what I mean is not that I haven't had to do a lot of healing. I just think I did the healing before. I've done a lot of healing, physically and emotionally. But what writing the story down did for me was it gave me a sense of, integration and coherence. And it's very satisfying to take all these things that I've been through and pull them into one integrated narrative of this is what it is, and this is what I would like you to think about. Because if I can take what I've been through and turn it into something helpful for someone else, then I've made something good out of that suffering.
What have been your greatest lessons from your life experience that you find are like the theme of what you've brought forward?
I don't know that I can say just one. I think the first one I would say is that I think there's a lot of suffering in this world. I think many of us suffer and feel like we're the only ones who are. And, I don't think people talk about it. People certainly don't post about it on Facebook. And, I think there's a lot of suffering in this world that we hold silently. So I think life is nothing like the fairy tale that we either think it is or that it should be. But the positive end of that is that we can make it through, like just terrible, terrible things. And you might be the most unfortunate person you know right now. That doesn't mean you will always be that way. There was absolutely a time that you would have met me and you would have thought, that poor girl is going to have the worst life ever. because that's what I was having. And now, I'm married, I've got kids, I'm happy, I've got great friends, I have a wonderful profession, I live in a nice house. Like, I'm one of those people you'd look at now and say, wow, what a great life. I wish I were her. So you just never know what's going to happen in life. And so I think my maybe the first message I would have is like, just keep going.
Mm.
Don't give up hope.
As you're talking, I hear this backstory of, especially, and I say this all the time, so it's might be redundant, but in this social media world, this visual world of like Instagram and this, people talk about seeing perfection, is I think sometimes we might feel like we're in a deeper or darker hole, imagining that other people are at a much higher, happier place only because we're looking at the images they choose to show us. And it's not the reality of what everybody's going through.
Absolutely. And I hear that as a psychologist all the time, that people, scroll through Facebook or Instagram and they become more and more despairing, thinking like, I'm the only one who fought with my husband, or I'm the only one whose kids want nothing to do with me, or I can't post a picture of myself because I put on 20 pounds and I don't want anyone to notice, or whatever. And nobody posts on these things like, today I'm having the worst day, I think I might have to give up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, people don't say that, but that doesn't mean that people aren't going through it. Life is hard. And God knows in this year of 2020, life is super hard.
Yeah. And there's that difficulty of finding your footing when everything that you might have had before is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a piece of really knowing ourselves a little bit more that's coming out of this experience too, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have our normal distractions for a while. We haven't. I think they're kind of coming back. But there was definitely a season where and I think it's a parallel when you don't have all these distractions in your life and you're kind of face to face with yourself. I feel like that's what trauma does for you. You can go several ways. You can just bury your head,
Mm-hmm.
and go deep and allow yourself to think all those thoughts that are going to make it harder and heavier. Or you can figure out how you're going to get through. Now,
Mm-hmm.
how do you help people who come to you and they're in that headspace of not being able to see the light in their life?
Well, I mean, when I work with people as a psychologist, usually people who start off with me are at one of the great low points of their life, right? So starting off with people who are really suffering is mostly a matter of establishing that I'm there for people in a warm and helpful way, and that I'm a safe person to hold their pain and listen to their secrets. So mostly in the beginning, it's a matter of trying to establish a connection that will feel safe. And then it's usually about a lot of listening to where that person is at. And that's what we do in the beginning. In the beginning, there's not a lot of like, well, try this, or why don't you do that? Like, there really isn't. Because in the beginning, people just need to feel heard. But they can't even begin to feel heard until they feel safe. Am I making sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's a big part of our human makeup to find connection and to feel safe and to have those protective relationships where we don't feel like we have to be guarded and fight for the space in the world.
It's interesting. I wish I remember where I read this. I can't credit it appropriately, but most people have heard of like the whole like fight or flight thing, response to stress. It's like fight or flight, and that's how most of us heard about it. But at some point, somebody added in tend and befriend as a third response to stress. And that really made me smile when I read that, because I think that can be the path, especially that women can take, the path of being under stress, but finding a connection that helps to ground people again. And, sometimes we can do that with our friends or our family, and sometimes we need a therapist for that. Not that I'm a friend, but you know what I mean. I tend, that's for sure.
Well, I think it's a type of friendship, though.
Mhm.
It's not your typical friendship where friends can go anywhere and do anything and there's not necessarily a goal in mind. I think when you are meeting with a psychologist, we're looking for healing. We're looking for an outcome, if you will. So,
Right.
but it is still a safe place, which makes it like a good friendship.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about your message of resilience and what you have brought forward from the trauma that you experienced and how that has grown this message.
So there's two ways I can take that. And I look to you to tell me which way you want me to go. I can tell you more about the book and the stories there and sort of my personal message of resilience. And I can tell you more about how I present on resilience and kind of the 6 areas that I encourage people to focus on.
Let's do the 6 areas.
Great. So I lecture now about resilience, and I have developed a kind of a handy way to think about things that you can work on to be more resilient. Now, I'm going to stop here and say that there are some elements of resiliency that we cannot work on. So, for example, there's a genetic component to resiliency. And, obviously we can't change that, right? We're born how we're born, and that's how it is. And there is an economic component to resiliency, so that people with more economic resources can usually get help easier, right? And maybe they live in a safer area, and maybe they don't worry so much about their personal well-being and stuff like that. And we can't help that either. But there are 6 things that we really can work on, either on ourselves or getting help for other people, that can absolutely increase our capacity for resilience. And the mnemonic I developed for it is goals plus M&M. It used to just be goals, and that was great. And then I had to add an M&M because I had to. So now it's a kind of quirky name, but I go with it. So I'll lay them out, and then we can talk about how you want to talk about it. So the G in goals stands for gratitude. The O is for optimism. The A is for active coping. The L is for love. The S is for social skills. And the M&M that I had to add in is for meaning making.
All right. Gratitude. Gratitude comes up a lot. And there's so much behind gratitude in the neuroscience world, in the neuroplasticity, and the power of gratitude on the structure of the brain and how that impacts your life. So let's talk about how you talk about gratitude and how that figures into resilience.
Mm-hmm. So, as you say, just thinking grateful thoughts immediately changes our brain and how it's working, and it almost immediately changes our mood. So gratitude is incredibly powerful. And I think a lot of people have heard about like keeping a gratitude journal and things like that, which are great things to do. I mean, it does really work. An example of gratitude that I would give you for my experience of 2020 is something that I started to do every night. I would say my little prayer before I went to bed. And I found that the first thing I said every single night was, I found myself saying, thank you for my health, and thank you for the health of my family, and thank you for my work and my husband's work. And, those are things like, you always think that, oh, I'm so grateful for that. But boy, in March, was I grateful for my health, like in a way that I have never been grateful for my health before. And I will tell you, March was a dark time. And I think, I was terrified. And just to be grounded every night in like, today I am healthy and today I still have a job would ease my soul. So that was gratitude, and it made a big difference for me.
Mm. I
Mhm.
know for me, what gratitude does is it helps me shift my perspective and look for those shards of light, right? Those streams of light that in some seasons, like you're saying, are not as bright, maybe, right?
Mhm.
But it's finding them. Or maybe gratitude could be seen as flipping a switch, right? Let's turn on some light. If we
Yeah.
feel like we're in complete darkness, gratitude can be like a candle or a lighter that brings a little light into the situation.
And I would say that almost always there really is something to be grateful for if we take the time to think about it. Like it is just it's just human nature, I think, that we focus on what is wrong or what's concerning us. I think it's a survival mechanism for our species to be like, what's that? Like, is that a bear coming? Like, I think we're just really wired to think about the problems to stay alive, but it doesn't help us. Well, I mean, I guess it helps us if there is a bear coming, but generally speaking, it does not help us to focus on problems all the time. It grounds us down.
Mm.
So gratitude is just for me, it's just a matter of the discipline of like, I am going to notice what has been good about this day. I'm going to remember that. And as soon as I do, I feel a lot better. And I think most of us do.
Mm. It's a great anchor.
Yeah.
So you don't feel quite so much like that ship that's just bobbing around in the sea.
Right. From worry to worry and problem to problem. Yeah. Hmm.
Mm. Awesome. Now, optimism. When you talk about optimism, what kind of optimism are you talking about? Because there's a conversation in the world right now about toxic positivity, right? Toxic positive thinking, or where I'm assuming that your optimism isn't the whole ignore the problem and pretend everything is sunny. So,
Not at all.
all right,
Yeah.
let's hear about.
No. And I always, it's interesting that you started it that way, because when I talk about optimism, I'm always very quick to say I am not talking about being fakely cheerful or pretending that things aren't what they are. I don't like that. Oh, cheer up. I hate that, actually. I really, really do. Or think on the bright side. Like no, not in a forced way. So for me, optimism is just the ability to look ahead and say, something good can happen here. And just to have hope, um, because I truly think there is always the chance that something good can happen and that we can work towards that. And the people I know who struggle to think of an optimistic outcome tend to be the same people who give up on trying to have an optimistic outcome. You got to be able to envision it in order to be able to work towards it.
And that's difficult for some people in their situation, depending on where they're at, envisioning that. And I
Hmm.
think hope is what keeps us alive, does it not?
Yeah, I think so. It certainly is what kept me alive. I mean, I definitely think that one of the things that helped me a lot is I am I am a very cheerful sort. There's these stories in my book that I spent a lot of my childhood in the hospital, and most of that childhood time in the hospital I spent singing. I had a little record player, and I listened to records and I sang along to them because there was nothing else I could do. Literally, I was just stuck in a bed, but I sang. And that's, very much a part of who I am, of just like, okay, this sucks. What can I do with this? And that's about being cheerful, and that's about being optimistic. The idea of, yeah, tomorrow could be better. So, let's hope for that.
Hmm. I heard you say, yeah, life sucks, but. And I think that a lot of the times the word but is a negative, right? You say
Hmm.
something and then the but comes, and everybody's like, oh, goodness, here comes the complaint. But you
Hmm.
flipped that script to, yes, life sucks, but
Hmm.
there's hope, but
Hmm.
there's always tomorrow.
Hmm.
And so I think that hopeful spin on reality, not avoiding it, but putting a hopeful spin on it is what I hear you saying.
Right. Hmm.
Mm.
Exactly.
Now, your next one is active coping. I like that phrasing, and I'm really interested to hear what that means and what it looks like. So, active coping, tell us about that.
So one of the things I see as a psychologist is that you can almost divide people in like two camps. And so, everybody comes in, again, nobody starts therapy because things are going so well, right? Everybody comes in pain. And some people, are just telling me what's happening and basically saying, well, I hope it gets better. And then other people tell me what's happening and end it with, well, what can I do, doc? What do you think I should do? How can I help myself? And those are the people that I know are probably going to wind up being active copers, as opposed to the first group who were sort of more passive, like, well, I hope it gets better, or I'll wait for it to get better, or, well, maybe my husband will stop doing this. They're taking a passive approach to their problem. But the second group, the people who are looking for solutions, they tend to have a stronger and more resilient recovery. Not that they can solve their whole problem. I'm not saying that. We have, like, goodness knows, there's usually many aspects to any problem you have that are just not under your control in any way. So let's take the problem of depression. You might have a genetic predisposition to depression. That might just be how you are. And maybe you've been through a terrible loss and can't control that either. But what can you control? Well, you can start therapy. You can consider medication. You can make sure you're getting enough sleep. You can try to eat well. You can get outside for 10 minutes a day. You can try some yoga. I mean, I can go on and on and on. My point is that there are, in almost any problem, at least some small things that you can do to help yourself. And if you can focus on those, you will improve your circumstance, at least to some degree. So active coping is definitely a characteristic of people who are resilient. I want to make clear, though, because some people hear that active coping, they're like, yeah, that's me. And it turns out like those are people who want to control every aspect of their problem, and that can't be done, right? But there's probably usually something you can do about it.
I just feel like active coping feels like something you can get your arms around, It's kind of
Yes.
really encouraging phraseology, active coping. So what I hear you saying is that action is a tool of resilience.
Yes. Yeah. Some kind of action.
Mm.
Sometimes for people, I need to be clear. Sometimes people are in such despair, the only action they can take that day is making sure they actually get out of their bed. But you know what? I'll take it. If that's a revolution, if you've been spending the last month in bed and you were able to get up and sit in a chair instead, then you did something.
So there's this idea of recognizing and celebrating the successes, no matter how small they are.
You got it. Mm-hmm.
Now love.
And building on them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, how often do people struggle to recognize what they are accomplishing?
Right. And that is certainly one of the things that I wind up talking about with clients all the time. They'll be like, oh, it's the same. I didn't really do anything. And at the end, I'm like, I don't know. I heard you called your aunt and you did take a walk and you applied for that job. And instead of doing this, you did that. And faces brighten up and they realize, oh, I did actually take some steps towards health. Yeah.
I wonder why we do that to ourselves. We don't give ourselves credit for the things that we do well. We're constantly harping on ourselves, shooting all over ourselves, criticizing ourselves. Sometimes I'm thinking we don't need anybody else to make our day go wrong. It's all in our own heads.
Yeah. I think often the enemy is that internalized negative critical voice that many, many, many people have. It's sad, honestly. It's an epidemic, really, of critical inner thinking.
That inner critical voice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that leads nicely into the idea of love, the
Mm-hmm.
aspect of love. So when you use that as part of your acronym, what do you mean by that, Lise?
So, love in my acronym refers to the love from other people. Resilient people do tend to feel that they have loving relationships, and that is one of the things that helps people the most recover. I'm always careful to say when I talk about love that you don't necessarily need to have love from everybody. You need somebody to love you. So, for example, there was a study done on children who'd been, severely traumatized as kids, like gone through terrible, terrible things, abuse, all kinds of stuff. And quite a few of those children had a resilient recovery, surprisingly resilient recovery. And quite a few of them did not have a loving family. I mean, maybe they loved them, but they were abusive, difficult, traumatic family backgrounds, but they had somebody who loved them. Whether it was a grandparent or an aunt or a neighbor or a friend or a teacher even, there was somebody in their life that they knew loved them and valued them and cared for them. So you don't need to be loved by everybody, and you may not be loved by the people you want to love you, but as long as somebody loves you, there's a way to keep going. I came from a family that was, I guess I wouldn't say they were unloving because they were loving, but they were really super neglectful and not there for me. Both my parents. But I had an older brother. He was incredible. And I had grandparents and I had friends. And my friends really kept me going. So, love. One of the messages that I talk about in the book a lot is to notice the people who are there in your life, to try not to focus on the disappointing relationships and to despair if those aren't working for you. Like, keep your eyes out for the people who are there for you. Friends, other family, whatever. I think we tend to hyper focus on the relationships that are not working.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. It's incredible to think about the power of one supportive relationship.
Yes.
I would like to say that something that another guest said to me at one point was people have broken receivers as well.
Oh, I love that phrase. Tell me more about that. I love that.
So we're so often looking out at how we're not getting what we need, but some of us have learned not to, that you can't rely on people to give you what you need.
Mm-hmm.
So our receivers get broken. We have difficulty receiving love, receiving support, receiving encouragement. We're like, Wonder Woman with her bracelets. We're like, shing, shing, shing,
Great. Yeah.
knocking those things away from ourselves because we don't know how to sit and receive. And I'm sure that you've been with people who, when you say nice things to them, they just can't take it. They squirm, they cry, they want to crawl under the carpet and stay there, right? And I would say that's a person who has a broken receiver. There's for some people, they have to even just learn. I had to learn to just take a compliment.
I would maybe add another thought into that concept, and I love that image of being a broken receiver. That's beautiful. And so the thought, I was trained with this concept. If you have not received things that you needed, especially as a child, and you never received those things, love, affirmation, whatever, that leaves you with a wound, a very deep and painful wound. And someday, when you do receive that thing that you always wanted, it's actually painful because receiving it can activate this sense of, oh, I needed this so bad and I never got it. I never got this. Oh, this is how much I needed this. So sometimes I think people deflect off with their little Wonder Woman bracelets, like you say so beautifully, because there is actually a pain that comes from getting the thing that we always want. It's great, but it's a bittersweet experience for many, many people.
I feel that. Oh my gosh, yes. That's interesting. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Mm.
I can relate to this from when I finally got together with my husband. My husband is my second husband. I loved him so much, and I was so grateful for the connection, which felt like this really safe and complete and grounding love that I had always needed. And it was also wrapped in this pain of like, I never had this, and it's been so hard, and I've been so alone, and what if I lose it? It came wrapped in a kind of a pain bow. So
I understand that too. When my husband and I were dating, I spent a lot of time pushing him away. Like if
right. That's what we do.
things felt too good, or they were too when they were great, I would break up with him. So instead of, breaking up when things were not good, I would wait till things were great, and then I would freak out and break up with him. And this was all when we were dating. So I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people don't even know, because I didn't know. That revelation came later as I did my own healing work, looking back and going, I was afraid to be vulnerable. I was afraid to trust. I was afraid to allow love, real love. And no one can give perfect, unconditional love, but there are those people who love you, and they see the worst of you and they still love you. And I think that can be very scary for someone who has not really experienced it. And that was what was happening to me.
Well, and your husband stuck with you though, huh?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good for him.
We just passed our 30th anniversary. So yeah, he's stuck with me.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't know why you're pushing me away, but I love you anyway.
Who knows why? But once I basically had to look at it, shake myself by the shoulders and go, okay, are you going to regret this in 10 years? Like, are you going to look back and go, I blew that? Or are you going to face this fear, take the leap, and trust that it's all going to be okay? Because every evidence was nothing bad was going to happen. The only bad that was happening, I was doing to myself.
You were smart. Good for you.
So once I decided, then it was like I was all in. I just had to get over myself, But I think that love piece is challenging, because when you haven't had your needs met, we forage for that in life, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And many times we forage in the wrong place.
Oh my gosh. That song, Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places.
Right. Yep. Yep. Yep.
So as we're talking about this, looking for love in all the wrong places and really pushing away love, these are when we're broken and wounded, which I think everybody comes to adulthood with some residual damage.
I don't know how you don't, because we're all raised by people, and everybody is an imperfect person. So, no matter how hard you try, I don't know how you can raise a child without, oh God, failing them in some way.
I know, which is the worst.
Yeah, which is the worst. You're right.
But that brings us to the next one, which is social skills, which kind of ties into what we've been talking about. The level of our social skills, our social intelligence, our emotional intelligence. Let's talk a little bit about what you mean by social skills.
Yeah. So, people who are resilient do tend to be people with really nice social skills. So they have the capacity to form relationships and keep relationships, and do what they need to solve problems when they're in relationship. It can be as simple as being able to say please and thank you and I'm sorry to, more complex skills than that. One thing we know about, happiness in general is that happiness really is mostly grounded in the quality of our relationships with other people. It's not about money, and it's not about a boat, and it's not about your house. Those things are great. Don't get me wrong. And I would love a house by the beach, but that's not really what makes us happy. Very much studies show that it's the quality of our relationships and having relationships, and you need those social skills for them. And I think the thing I want to just kind of circle around to, as we're we made it through goals, we're heading towards M&M, is the concept that all of these things I'm talking about, gratitude, optimism, active coping, love, and social skills, these are all capacities that we can develop. You don't need to be born with them. You can learn about them. You can work on them yourself. You can get a psychologist to help you with them. You can help each other with them. These are all things that we can get better at. And that's why I like these things. Because I think there's some elements of resilience that people feel like, I'm just not a resilient person. Like, okay, maybe you're not so much, but here are some things you could do to be a more resilient person. Absolutely.
It's that work towards empowering yourself to have those things in the way you want those things, instead of standing on the other side of the fence and thinking there's no way you can have them.
Right. And it's taking that active coping approach to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So social skills, when you talk about social skills, do you also think about like emotional intelligence, that idea of being able to understand emotionally something?
Sure. Yeah. And, and again, some people are more gifted with that than others. But, I work with people in therapy on being a better listener and being better at remembering somebody's birthday and doing things like, well, why don't you call them? Right? Like helping people just take those basic steps towards maintaining and keeping relationships. Again, I think some people are more naturally gifted at this than others, but that doesn't mean you can't get somewhat better at it.
It's that level of personal responsibility.
Right.
Yeah.
I hear all the time people will say, well, I don't have any friends. It's like, okay, what are you doing towards making friends? Have you called your best friend from high school? Like, I bet she would still talk to you, that kind of thing. What are you doing to help yourself have those friends?
And what do we mean by friendship? Like, what's the picture that's being painted? Because friendships really do vary. They're those people that if your life is falling apart and you call them, they're there, but you don't necessarily talk to them every day. There's people who have their group they've had since high school and they still do things together, 30, 40 years later. Friendship has such different, it looks different.
Right.
In every situation too.
Sure. And sometimes you need different kinds of friends for different things. For me, what I mean by friendship is actually something very profound, because I mentioned to you, my family was really very limited in their capacity to take care of me. And also they died, every one of them, some very tragically, actually. So for me, my friends became my family and still are. So like at the end of my book, in like the acknowledgement section, I list by name every single best friend I have ever had. And by the way, I'm still in touch with almost all of these people. Like, my best friend from first grade, that kind of thing. So to me, friends are not just friends. They are my family. They supported me and I supported them. It's, reciprocal, obviously.
That's interesting. The intention in relationship, as we're still talking about, building these skills, these capacities. You don't have to have 50 friends in the moment. You just need one really good one.
Yeah. Or maybe a couple. I think sometimes one really good one, if you're going through crisis, that might be hard on them, right? Oh God, because sometimes we need a lot of lifting up, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a village.
Yeah.
So your next one is MNN, meaning making. Tell me.
Yeah. So I had to add in meaning making to this list of things that I wanted people to think about and work on because I realized it was so key and it had to be there. So meaning making is the ability to take a look at what we have been through and make sense of it. And people don't make meaning out of their trauma right away. You know, if you're right in the middle of going through chemotherapy, you're not going to make meaning out of it. Like you're just going to try to survive it, right? But eventually, it's very important to be able to look back at whatever trauma or difficulty you've gone through and say, okay, what did I learn from this? What has this taught me? And hopefully, what good can I make out of this? So for me, as an example, I mean, the way that I make meaning out of everything that I've been through, you know, fire and being disfigured and going through all these treatments. And there were actually, in the end, there were 4 suicides in my family. I survived all of this. And the meaning that I make from this is, again, life is incredibly hard. And I can help other people when they're going through their incredibly hard times. I can use this pain to help people. And I did, and I do. And now, you know, with this book, I'm trying to take this message of, I have been through this, I understand, you can get through this too. And I'm trying to reach as many people as I can. So that's the meaning I make out of my suffering is I'm going to help people who suffer to keep going. That's my way. Other people make meaning out of their suffering by volunteering, right? Or running marathons, or raising money, or I don't know, 20,000 other ways I think that people can help others or come to some sense of, this is what I learned from this. I hear from a lot of people that the thing that they learned from their suffering is compassion for others. You know, I hear a lot of people say, if I hadn't gone through this, I would not have been the nice person that I am now, or the helpful person that I am now. So I think there is almost always, in retrospect, some good that comes out of our pain.
Mm-hmm. I wholeheartedly agree. I think that I call it the beauty from ashes, you know, that idea that nothing is wasted in God's economy. We live in this imperfect world and we're constantly bumping up against imperfect people. And sometimes in our home lives, people have home lives that are horrible, and children don't get to choose that. And so there is that idea of learning how to look back, learning how to assess once we've grown a little, healed a little. And it's so true. There are crumbs, you know, in our path that if we're looking for those crumbs, those really become essential to who we are in our relationships to the people around us. And I feel like the more aware we are of those things, the healthier we are in that process, you know, because we
Yeah.
can take our meaning and maybe misuse it by becoming a martyr or someone who always, you know, lays down and doesn't have a voice because this is what I have to do in my relationship. So I think that growth piece and really recognizing that that's a crumb. When you've lived like, I grew up in an abusive environment when I was young. So my formative years were in an abusive home. And once I worked through all of that as an adult, it gives me a unique opportunity to connect with people who have that experience.
Exactly.
Right? It kind of qualifies you, for lack of a better term. When you make meaning out of it, it qualifies you to become a vehicle to help another person.
Right. And then you become a source of hope for someone else going through the same thing you suffered through, to say, oh, look, she made it. I can make it. That's exactly, yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I heard something recently that really touched my heart. So there's this organization, it's called the Phoenix Society, and they're an organization for burn survivors and families of burn survivors and healthcare professionals, stuff like that. And they have a big event every October. And normally it's an in-person conference, and it's great and all that. And of course this year, it's going to be virtual. And apparently, according to the organizers of this group, the biggest concern from the members of the Phoenix Society, the biggest concern about this event being virtual was, but how are we going to help people? How can I give back if it's virtual? I loved that. It's like all these people, instead of like, oh, my conference, I'm not going to be able to see my friend and I'm not going to be able to go to this hotel. It's like, but are we really going to help people if it's that way? Am I really going to be able to be of service? Like, yeah.
There's a phrase that meaning making encourages. How can I help people? How can I serve another person? It turns that attention outward.
Right.
Now, when you think about this acronym, goals plus M&M, how has that really been a tool in your own life? Is this your own personal growth kind of put out as a system?
So, I got to goals plus M&M from just doing a lot of reading. I was doing a lot of reading on resilience and, all kinds of studies, and kind of sifted it down to the things that I thought that people could again, work on, and I thought it was a good area of focus. But I will say, after I developed it, I looked at it, I'm like, so does this apply to me, Lise-Deguire? And I'm like, yeah, actually it does. But didn't come at it from me. I came at it from this, these studies. I presented on it. Well, I have presented on it quite a few times now. But one time recently, I presented at it at a temple. And one of the women there raised her hand and said, my parents were both Holocaust survivors. And she asked me a question. And somebody else in the audience said, so your parents, the Holocaust survivors, does this apply to them, this acronym? And she looked at them and she thought about it. She goes, yes, it does. So I felt like that was a little bit of extra validation. But most people who I talk about this with who are resilient, as soon as they see that, they're like, oh, that's it. That's it. That's the resilient mindset.
And they probably have used those processes in some way, shape, or form, right?
Right. Unconsciously, not thinking about it, and certainly not labeling it as goals plus M&M, but yeah.
I do have one more question for you as we wrap up our time together. And that question is, when you bring this message forward, if someone is really, their mind is moving at 100 miles an hour and they have all these thoughts that are swimming around in their head, what are 3 things you would really want someone to anchor into today on this topic?
So what I would say is that you can be the most unfortunate person you know at one point in your life. But life changes. And just because you're unfortunate now doesn't mean that you can't build yourself a beautiful life. And I'm sharing my story to help kind of exemplify that, and to help us also have hope for each other and to be there for each other. And also to say, look, if you have made it past your point of great suffering life, if you're in a good place, then give back. Try to be there for other people now. If you are in a fortunate place, reach back and help somebody else. The way that you were talking about earlier, Gina. Was that 3? I don't know if it was.
It was a flow of like 3 thoughts. So it was.
There you go. Yes. Okay, good.
This message is so helpful in the time of life that we are in history. We have been working through COVID and quarantine. It's October 2020 as we're recording, and we've been doing this since March as a global community. So I think we are all at some level of healing trauma. I feel like this experience has been a giant mirror for a lot of people. It has
Mm-hmm.
reflected back to us a lot of things that aren't great. And different people in the world have behaved in not great ways. It's like amplified the hearts of people. There have been people that have done incredibly helpful, kind things, raising money and helping neighbors and, all these amazing things. And then we have the people that swing to the other extreme where they're violent and harmful and aggressive. And it's just been such a petri dish,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
much going on in such confined emotional spaces, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that, so when I started this book, the subtitle, I'm going to say the whole book again, and it's not just for my purposes. I'm going somewhere with it. The title of my book is Flashback Girl, and the subtitle is Lessons on Resilience from a Burn Survivor. Now, I came up with that title 3 years ago, and I certainly never thought that this book would be released into this year of 2020, because who would have thought this year could even happen, right? And that it would be released in a year that there is so much universal hardship. But, here we are, and there are a lot of things that resiliency can teach us about ways to keep going and keep our chins up. If I want to end on an optimistic note, let's just say the vaccine is coming. Vaccines are coming. I mean, they're not here yet. We're going to have to wait a while, and we have to be patient and keep our chins up. But, scientists are working all around the world 24/7 to save us. And they will, that's coming. That's an optimistic reframe, right? Mm-hmm.
That, and the idea that look for those people who are shards of light, those people that are not being their worst version, but they are being their best version, and how we can add light to that light each day in our interactions.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes. Look for the good people, right? As Mr. Rogers used to say, look for the helpers.
Yeah, look for the helpers.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're doing it quietly, but, do I want to be part of the problem or part of the solution, right?
Right.
Do I add fuel to the fire that's destructive, or do I add flame to the light that leads people home, if you will?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Lise, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me today, for sharing with such a sweetness and a grace. Your heart is just tender and gentle and caring, and I feel like that comes through in your message and how you present it. And so I just want to honor you for being a person who has taken a journey toward the light and being a light and helping people and just being a beautiful soul in the world. Thank you so much for bringing that to my program today.
Thank you, Gina. And what you see in me, I see in you.
Thank you. The reflection, huh?
Right.
That's great. Today, friends, I've been speaking with Dr. Lise-Deguire. She's a clinical psychologist, burn survivor, and author of her memoir, Flashback Girl, Lessons on Resilience from a Burn Survivor. If you head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 198, I will have links to Dr. Lise and her book. And while you're there, please join my email address list. I do send out periodic encouraging emails. Friends, we hope that no matter where you find yourself today, that you recognize that at any given moment, you can make a different choice. You can make a better choice. You can turn things around one decision, one gratitude at a time. So we encourage you to find those shards of light in your life. Be a shard of light in your life during these difficult times. Remember that we do live in community, so surround yourself with a loving community. Find a friend, be a friend, build a place where people are safe and can be their best selves. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast today. If you found it encouraging, we ask that you would subscribe, share this with a friend, and look at Dr. Lisa's book as a resource. Maybe you could do a book club. Maybe you could find a group of people that really need to walk through it and work together to build health and hope and happiness. Thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to sharing more with you next week. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.